Alright folks, welcome back to Talking Soccer. I am Justin Horniger. Today we are going to talk about the recent 2-3 loss St. Louis City SC to San Jose at Energizer Park this weekend, and talk a little bit about the implications of that match and look ahead into Wednesday's matchup with the Chicago Fire in the US Open Cup. I was planning on doing this video at the stadium today at today's press conference, but we were in a tornado warning during the press conference, so could not happen. I had to get home here in the basement, and luckily everything is kind of cleared out by the time I'm recording this video. So good things, and everyone is safe. Getting into what happened this weekend, St. Louis lose 2-3, and there's a lot of frustration after this result. On paper, that maybe seems silly. San Jose have lost one match this year, 27 points out of 30 possible. The Earthquakes are a buzzsaw, and you would definitely not expect that looking at last year, but the reasoning there is that there's a lot of addition by subtraction of, you lose Chicho Arango, you lose Joseph Martinez, but instead you have Preston Judd up top, who, while Preston Judd has been a journeyman MLS player up until this point with some promise, but 26-year-olds usually don't have their pop-out year. But instead, what Bruce Arena can do is they can do a lot more defending from the front than they could with that front two of Arango and Martinez, obviously. Players that are more active off the ball versus on the ball, and that has been the Earthquakes' bread and butter. And because of that, because of also forgetting to pick up the option of Christian Espinoza, which is still just baffling to me that that this is even a thing that happens in a Major League Soccer organization that's currently top of the Western Conference. But in forgetting to pick up that contract extension, that contract option, Nico Sakaris can then step in and is given the keys to run this offense as a left-footed 10, and is making just some fantastic passes, some fantastic plays, having a breakout season. So maybe the key to developing an MLS player is to just forget to pick up the option on your star winger. I don't know. Maybe that's the key. So anyway, coming into this match, the Earthquake rotated, right? So you're St. Louis, you're at home, you have these performances that have been good, but the results haven't been there, and you're losing matches in key moments where maybe if the roster is better, if you're further along in this project and this rebuild, that maybe that's a point where you do win the match. But instead, they go down 1-0 early on a ball that is just a kind of harmless clearance from Roman Berkey. Sergio Cordova is playing the ball. Max Floriani flies in. He's able to climb up over him, knock the ball loose. San Jose recover, and then this is a pattern that, one, happens to St. Louis a few times this year, and that they turn the ball over as they are going forward, and now all of a sudden they're just stuck where against the ball, because they're committing high, the numbers game is just not in their favor, and San Jose are so quick in transition. And that's the other thing, is that St. Louis have played tough opponents this year. They have the toughest strength of schedule. So when you are making these mistakes, especially in this early going part of the season, you're making these mistakes against teams that are going to make you pay for making these mistakes. All of a sudden, Preston Judd wide open at the penalty dot, because just the runs that San Jose can make 4-on-3 in the attack as St. Louis are trying to recover and get back are too much for the defense to handle. And I think you could definitely maybe point the blame at Polvara in this instance, on Lucas McNaughton on the third goal, potentially. There were some issues with the marking and the spacing, but this is more of that. You just cannot turn the ball over in these moments, and it's hurt St. Louis a couple times throughout the season where they turn the ball over, they're in a good spot, they turn the ball over, and then it's a goal coming the other way. And that's the frustrating part of it, is you can see that the processes are getting to a good point. You can see that there has been improvement in the squad as they work on going from a team that wants to control the match without the ball, that wants to play chaos defensively, that wants to use their press as their creative driver, to a team that wants the ball, that wants to recycle possession, that wants to have these intricate passing sequences to create an attack in third, but is also heavy on the press. And St. Louis go down 1-0, and they really put their foot on the gas against the rotated San Jose attack, and they had a lot of success, bar the final component, which is putting the ball in the back of the net. You had 2 crossbars in the first half. You have shots that just have to be goals. Marcel Hartl steals another pass at the midline and is driving and has a defender on his back, but it's nothing but one-on-one with the keeper at that point and just doesn't put on target. he had a Conrad Vollum attempt before the first goal where, again, it's a good transition from St. Louis. They're getting momentum. They create this chance at the top of the box. No one's in front of Conrad Vollum. He's wide open, and it just skies it over the net. So, like, that tells you, I wrote in the newsletter this week. So if you read Talking Soccer, I will link it down below. But if you read my newsletter, you saw my arguments, you saw what I was talking about. And that is that it's clear that this team has investment they need to do in the summer, which has always been the plan. You go into this winter, and Corey Ray was very open about this when he took over last winter ahead of this window, that this window was going to be starting to put the pieces in place. And then in the summer, when you can invest in that DP, when you can really do more of a turnover in the summer versus the winter, maybe that is like, you look at how like a Riley Lynch is playing in MLS Next Pro, you look at how like Palmer Alt are playing in MLS Next Pro, like there are potentially options there that things improve after the summer, especially with a team that has the identity starting to take place, that has the building blocks and the real process in place. Like you look at a team that should ideally be, if they are finishing all their chances, if they're getting all the stops that they should be getting on the playoff bubble. And while that's not like ideal, that's not where this team wants to be, that's at least a better spot to be at this point in the season than second to last in the Western Conference. Okay, we've talked about the first goal. Going into the half, St. Louis had 1.5 expected goals. San Jose just had that one shot on target, but it is the goal. So again, taking advantage of moments. The opposition is, really finishing their opportunities while you are not. Going into the second half, St. Louis still put their foot on the pedal, even as San Jose starts subbing in their starting 11. Timo Werner started this match, but outside of that, like Nico Sakaris comes in later, like Buda comes in later. San Jose eventually get to where they have most of their starting 11 in the lineup, and that's when they really start to come back into this game. But for now, still up 1-0. St. Louis finally get a goal after a period of recycled possession. Sergio Cordova makes his run from the wing, and this is maybe the first game that I saw him on the wing where I get it. I understand what they're trying to do with this. Cordova makes his run from the wing. He is a ball played in. It misses him initially. Marcel Hartel collects the rebound, sits on it, is very patient. As everyone collapses on him, he lifts it into Cordova, and he gets his first goal as a St. Louis City SC player. Then on a subsequent throw-in deep in San Jose's area. So you actually don't see this goal on the broadcast, and like everyone's just so caught up in the celebration that San Jose kick off. St. Louis are able to force them back into their own end. There's a ball out of bounds, deflected off of City. San Jose have the throw in. St. Louis win the throw in. Daniel Edelman steps up, knocks it loose. Simon Betcher collects it and finds Marcel Hartel, who is streaking across the box, across the goal mouth, and scores his first of the game. And this is a goal also. Let's talk about the goals that St. Louis have allowed. This goal is also one that St. Louis have tried to recreate often this season, and of the goals they've scored, this has been maybe the most recreatable pattern. You saw this on the goal against Charlotte. You've seen this in a couple of goals this year where Edelman steps up, wins the ball, knocks it loose. Subsequently, like maybe it's Betcher, maybe it's whoever, picks up the ball and finds an attacker centrally. This was 2-1. Now you're in control of this match. You should, up 2-1, be looking to keep that lead, especially at home, especially as San Jose haven't necessarily looked up to the task at this point in the 53rd minute. So, of course, right on the other side of halftime, you've taken over this game. But they are going to pay for not finishing things in the first half, where they had, actually, this has been updated since I last looked at the stats, 2.08 expected goals in the first half, like 3 shots on target, 5 big chances, but ultimately no goals. So you're paying for that lack of execution in the first half. In the second half, San Jose are able to get some more momentum, even though St. Louis still have more possession. But as we always talk about, it doesn't matter against a team that wants to counterattack. I think there is an adage that whoever possesses the ball is in control, but that's not always the case. And after St. Louis score those 2 goals, it is then hard for them to respond, and they don't have another shot on target the rest of the match. So they have that goal in the 53rd minute from Marcel Hartel. The next shot on target by anyone is Timo Werner in the 65th minute. So there's a lot of time back and forth where St. Louis have held on to control. They're taking the sting out of the game. But then as San Jose builds in this match, as Nico Sakaris comes in and is able to really get on the ball, and as that creative 10, this is what he's been very good at, find ways to get passes in. There are some nice through balls that he sends in from the right over to the left. And this maybe speaks to where St. Louis have had this problem in this game and where they've had a problem in controlling those moments is as the wing backs are pushing high. Like Conrad Valum, if you look at his heat map, he's essentially a winger in this game. So as he's pushed high and St. Louis turned the ball over, this is particularly true on the third goal. As he's pushed high, St. Louis turned the ball over. Nico Sakaris is able to find room as Buda pushes forward, and then Timo Werner on the far side is just sitting in that space between Lucas McNaughton, the third center back, and there's no one on the wing at all because Conrad Valum is up high, making his run into the box as the ball is turned over deep in the attacking territory. So as San Jose pounce on it and recollect and find Timo Werner streaking forward, like Conrad Valum has no chance, even if it was a fresh winger, a fresh wing back, even if it was somebody who hadn't been out there for 83 minutes. And like Conrad Valum was still making strong runs at the final whistle. So Conrad Valum was not exhausted, depleted. This is not on him. It's on the way that the formation is set out to where Valum is making his run into the attack and then the ball's turned over. It's not taken care of on that end. And now all of a sudden there's that gap between the wing and the third center back. And maybe this is on Lucas McNaughton for not recognizing that Timo Werner was back there. You have McNaughton and Timo Baumgartel kind of bunched up. This is also a problem in Seattle. So maybe it is just the understanding between Baumgartel and McNaughton with Orozco still out in concussion protocol that then Timo Werner is just wide open and hits it first time. It's like a beautiful finish, but like a gorgeous finish for Timo Werner, who is now one of the best players in MLS. So I had to take the L on that take because I thought that Timo Werner was pretty much toast after what we saw at Leipzig. But coming back to San Jose and just being not the focal point of the attack, but kind of the accessory to the attack of like Preston Judd and Nico Sakaris and like these young and middle career domestic MLS players, and then Timo Werner is just like the icing on the cake, and has been ready to work and ready to put in the effort. So credit to Bruce Arena there, and obviously he's turned this team around. And San Jose have lost one game this year against Seattle in a game that they shouldn't have lost, but Seattle just had fantastic goalkeeping, and that kind of gets you to the crux of why St. Louis are in this position at this point in the year. If you look at it, St. Louis goal differential of -7. If you look at their expected goal differential, so that is expected goals minus expected goals against, and then goal differential, of course, goals minus goals against. And their expected goal differential is 1.5. So -7 versus 1.5. And that tells you that, one, they're not getting the stops that they need. And one of those problems is your designated player goalkeeper, who has been fine, but not ideal, I would say. Not above a 0 in terms of goals added as a shot stopper, which is an issue when he takes up a designated player spot. And so they're behind on that. And then they aren't scoring. I think they're -4.5 in goals for. So they have created 4.5 more goals than they've actually scored, which if you look at like where that puts them in the table, like that's an extra 7 points on the table. If you take into fact the games that they have created more than their opponents. If you look at this game against San Jose, if you look at the Charlotte game, and even the Seattle game, they probably should have eked out a draw instead of losing. There are games that they, the Dallas game, for instance, there are games that they should have taken more from that because they just don't have a clinical finisher up top. They haven't been able to. And that just points to, it's becoming very clear what St. Louis need in the summer. Designated player either at striker or at wingback, if you're not going to unleash Mekhi Joyner into that role, because I think that he still is more of an attacking player than a wingback, and I don't think you necessarily want him to do that defensive work. So if you can get a DP wingback that, like in this system, is going to be very important, or a DP striker, if you're not comfortable with Sergio Cordova at that point, I think we've seen enough from Simon Betcher that he is more of a complementary player than that number 9. So those are two very apparent needs. I think they have gotten better at center back this year. I think that is a position that they are set on. And maybe you look at another midfielder, but I think that all relies on Edu Leuven coming back into form and being match fit. If Edu Leuven is 75 minutes fit in this match, as well as the Seattle match, as well as name a match over the past 2.5 seasons, the things go a lot differently for St. Louis. He's their most creative midfielder. For a while over the last 2 seasons, they weren't able to win without him in the lineup. So you're thinking about what Edu Leuven's able to do. If Edu Leuven's in, then all of a sudden maybe he's in for Daniel Edelman, or maybe he's that right-sided 10. Now, all of a sudden, that depth gets a lot deeper. And you know that you have a great player, Marcel Hartel. So now you just have to surround him with a supporting cast that can finish the chances that he creates. If you look at last year, he had 4 more expected assists than he did actual assists, and that is no one being able to put the ball in the back of the net. When you sell João Klaus at the beginning of the year without much time to replace him, like Cordova is that kind of stopgap, but he's not giving you the production that the Klaus gave you over the back half of the season last year. You're getting more of Klaus from the first half of the season last year than you can see the issues. And that is where it gets a little bit frustrating that St. Louis are both ahead of where they should be at this point in the process and the rebuild under Yohan DeMay, but also not executing to the level that they are creating. And that tells you exactly what the issue is. And then maybe some of that is either in how DeMay is setting up his lineup, how DeMay is choosing the personnel, or that the roster is just not at the point it needs to be. The roster, it just doesn't have enough players that DeMay is comfortable in. I kind of lean towards the latter. This is a roster that was largely built to play a more direct style, to play a style of like Red Bull-esque high energy, off the ball, make your press, be the large creator. And after Bradley Carnell leaves, like it evolves. I've talked about this a lot over the last couple of years, so I don't want to get back into it, but Olaf Melberg comes in last year and he's supposed to be the one to take them from like that energy drink style to a style that's more comfortable on the ball, but still with that press that DeMay is trying to institute this year. Luch Pfannenstiel leaves. He doesn't have a scouting or analytic department to leave behind, and this was a crux in The Athletic had an article today talking about Sporting Kansas City and just how much work they've had to do to rebuild after Peter Vermes left as the soccer czar, manager, sporting director, and how like one of the big things was that they did not have a scouting and analytic department. St. Louis did not have a scouting and analytic department. They had some scouts, they had an analyst, but this whole thing was Luch Pfannenstiel working his connections. Like Luch Pfannenstiel very much wanted to do it his way. And when he left, there was not much of an infrastructure left behind. So Corey comes in, they quickly get to work, and they hired some great analysts, they hire some scouts. So like that is happening now, but it takes a while for that to catch up. So you had a winter window where they don't have that mode in place. They don't have that apparatus in place. Coming into the summer, when they do have to make those big decisions on your DP, on what do you do with Jake Girdwood-Reich, on do you pick up Cedric Toyer's option? Is there any other movement you can do with this roster? You have a couple players on this roster who just like aren't around, like Josh Yarrow. When John Hackworth leaves last year, when he's working on the end of season roster calls for whatever reason, why he's able to make those decisions, they pick up Josh Yarrow's option, and Josh Yarrow doesn't even make the City 2 roster yesterday when the Academy's at MLS Next Flex and the first team have a game on Wednesday. So like it tells you that there are some wasted places on this roster, that there's a lot of movement to do. And then you can have a little bit of optimism over the fact that, okay, well, at least Yohan DeMay's system seems to be ahead of schedule. You know, there are clearly players that are going to work in the system, in the squad. Like Chris Durkin is having his best year of his career, I would say. Like definitely since he's arrived in St. Louis with what he's doing on both sides of the ball. You know, what you have in Marcel Hartel defensively, like what you found in Yaziel Orozco and even Lucas Magnon, who are both positive goals added players. Pretty good. Like Paul Vera, as a converted center back, I think he still has a lot of room to grow, but so far he's had some really positive moments. And Timo Baumgartner is one of the best possession value players in the league up until this past game. So you have players that are going to work in the system. You have an academy that seems to be loaded with players ready to come through, but you know, you got to give that time to Miggy Perez. You got to give that time to Mekhi Joyner. And then when Dyson Pierce is ready, got to give him that time too. This is a little bit too inside baseball probably for this video, but that is kind of the rant I went on in the newsletter this week. So read that if you want a little more in-depth breakdowns. But now heading into Wednesday, US Open Cup match against Chicago in Chicago. St. Louis has never won in Chicago after 3 matches. Last year, it was a real back and forth game. St. Louis lost 3-2. One of the early games of the David Critchley tenure. And now you have a Chicago team who I think embarked on a similar journey last year under Greg Berhalter, where Berhalter took over a real mess of a franchise, and their first year they make the playoffs. Now, like, the Eastern Conference isn't as strong top to bottom as the West. Like, you look at the top teams of the East, but like there are a lot of bad teams in the East compared to the West. So like I think it is maybe a little bit easier to turn things around quickly in the Eastern Conference compared to the West. There's just, the West is like, you have your LAFCs, your Vancouvers, your Seattles, and everyone else is kind of like around the same spot. And then you've had St. Louis, you've had Austin, and then, of course, Sporting Kansas City, who has been bad. And so it's maybe a little bit harder, especially when you have the strength of schedule St. Louis have had over these first 10 games, to have that quick of a turnaround. And when you're underperforming on top of that, you're under executing on top of that. So now you're heading into Chicago with an opportunity. US Open Cup, if you win this match, you're into the quarterfinals. Just 3 more wins after that. Like, the club is viewing this as a serious opportunity to win a trophy. They're putting their best foot forward. And I think it's also an opportunity after you've had a couple rough string of results. You're 3 straight on the road. You draw 2, you lose in Seattle, you lose at home. This is an opportunity, if you can get a win over a rival like Chicago, in a place where you've never won before, a team that won 5-0 against SKC in the weekend, a team that has had more success defensively this year than they would have expected to, but will also have to rotate coming into this game. St. Louis will probably have to rotate coming into this game. But the other factor there is teams are not rotating as much as you would expect, because this is a 14-game first half of the schedule and a month-and-a-half long World Cup break, over a month-long World Cup break. Teams, I think, are understanding that they can kind of empty the tank a little bit, hit that month break, and then come out the other side. So you're not seeing as much rotation through these midweek games as you maybe have in past years for teams in CONCACAF Champions Cup, for teams in the US Open Cup. So both teams are probably going to come at this with their best lineups. I think for St. Louis, like, I want to see Mekhi Joyner get in there. I think Mekhi Joyner is the best lineup, but obviously there's something there when I've asked about it. Like, DeMay hasn't been totally forward with what he wants to see on Mekhi Joyner. Obviously, there's some things with learning the position of playing the 10 versus a wing. Definitely, I understand that. And then learning the structural ask of him to stay in position, to not venture out of position, to be disciplined in his positioning. And I think for young players, that is like a tough ask for most of them. And then, like, seeing where Tyson Pierce is. DeMay has talked very highly of both Tyson Pierce and Miggy Perez. So, like, do they get extended runouts in this U.S. Open Cup? I know Tyson Pierce is still coming back from injury, but Miggy Perez especially, Miggy Perez is one of the better midfielders from a goals added perspective. And now some of that is playing at a really complicated position, a position that has a lot of competition, as that, like, maybe he's a 10, maybe he's an 8, maybe he's a 6. So, but bottom line is Miggy Perez has been actually good this year from a goals added perspective. So if you can get him more minutes coming off the bench, or if you can get him more minutes in general, and maybe eventually he breaks into the starting lineup, maybe you just have a need there. It's good to see that a homegrown player who had kind of a surprise breakout season in year 1, goes on loan to Birmingham, like, things really fell apart, and he's just not being used towards the end of that sprint. Coming back, playing the entire season with City 2 at MLS Next Pro last year, and then coming into this season and, like, looking better than he was 2 years ago, and maybe even in his rookie year. But a lot of room to grow there, and for a player that is playing, again, in a completely different style. So I don't think that can be discounted. It's just how much the ask has been to completely change styles, to change asks for a group that was put together to largely play a different style. And I don't know, there's some optimism here, but obviously it is disappointing to get to this point where they have 1 win, they have 6 points on the table. Like, there's a lot of ground to make up if they are to make up that ground. But a win on Wednesday against Chicago, in Bridgeview, at SeatGeek Stadium. It's an interesting environment. And if they can do that and then head to Sunday in Austin, they've had 1 game this year where, as I'm looking at before, not counting San Jose, 1 game this year, not counting San Jose, where I look at things at the start of the season and I say, that's a winnable game. That was the home game against New England. San Jose, not knowing that they're going to turn it around like this, I thought that would be winnable also. Obviously, not the case. But these Austin games are the 2 of the 3 other games that, obviously, they play DC, which helps. But these Austin games are some of the other games I thought, looking at it from the beginning, were going to be winnable. And Austin had been very up and down and sometimes outright bad this year. So you look into that road trip and hosting Austin next month as some opportunities to pick up some points and maybe build some momentum into the World Cup break. You've played the toughest part of the schedule. You have LAFC at home during their CONCACAF Champions Cup run, and really they'll have like 6 straight weeks of midweek matches at that point. So Maybe you get a little bit of luck along the way for St. Louis City SC. On the road against Colorado, like that's gonna be tough. They never play well at Colorado, and Colorado have been better, but they've been up and down as well. On the road at DC United, like that should be one they like to win, and then home at Austin FC. Then they go into the break. Then on July 16th, come back and host Sporting Kansas City. So that is where they are. They need to probably end, like if you're looking at that, you want probably 9-10 points out of these next 5 games. And I think that's doable. If you can win those Austin games, if you can win at DC, if you can find a draw off of LAFC or Colorado, and then you're going into the break, 16 points is not great. It's not where you want to be at that point, but at least you should be within distance of those playoff spots. And at that point, you go into the summer, you have another month and a half to work with this group to build on what Yohan Neme is trying to build. If things fall apart from here, then you can start asking more questions. But I just think that like looking at who this team has faced, looking at some of the positivity in their performances, not the results, but the performances, and coming out the other side looking like a stronger team sometimes, I just think that the roster either isn't there yet or that Domain needs to learn what personnel works for him. And that could be a knock against him, but I'm not quite there yet. Now, if they have like some terrible performances over the next month, like maybe I'll get there, but right now I'm not there yet. All right, folks, that is it for me. Hope you all have a great day. If you like my content, of course, gonna try to do some different things on this channel. I'm trying to be a little bit more engaged now that I'm like out of the fog of having another baby. So that's where I'm at, trying to be more consistent. Of course, I am usually at just about every St. Louis City training availability, so hopefully I have a little bit more of an idea of what's going on there. So if you like this content, if you like my reviews, if you enjoy listening to me yap about soccer, if you like listening to me talking about soccer, give me a subscribe and subscribe to the newsletter if you want to read this in written form. I have some more statistics and analysis there that you might find interesting. But till then, folks, thank you so much for watching, and we'll talk real soon.